Hi there, Ischa here, and welcome to The Higher Life, where I take concepts that are considered spiritual, esoteric and new age and unpack how these can be very powerful practical tools that you can apply to walk the path of personal transformation, to walk the path of personal empowerment, and to fulfill your highest potential at this time in history. And I believe that fulfilling your personal highest potential is in fact playing a part in fulfilling humanity's highest potential at this time in history, which is to live from a truly compassionate state, to really live from an open and empowered heart. That is where we are moving. I think that's what we're moving into as a one unified intelligence. And if you look out in the world, you can see that in many disciplines such as spirituality, psychology, well-being, even in the business world, we see this movement out of a very progress, very performance, very influential driven relationship to power, whereas we feel empowered if we're influential, if we're manifesting out in the world, if we're making money, if we have status. That progress orientated way of viewing human success or potential, that's really dying out. It's ending. There's a ceiling for that, and we're moving into a new phase of humanity where we're embracing our inner resourcefulness in a very conscious and awake way. So that was always there. We always had that inner tendency towards compassion and creativity and receptivity, that very feminine part of our human experience, but we hadn't really owned it as being a truly powerful resourcefulness in our lives. And the outer world keeps reflecting back to us the absence of this inner resourcefulness of being part of our human experience, as in we see what happens when we live as human beings with the lack of compassion, a lack of understanding the fact that we are living in a one planet unified system and that everything that we do impacts the whole system. We think that we can just control our conditions so that we can benefit from certain access to resources in our individual lives or in our tribes, and it won't have an impact on us if other people are suffering. And as the world has become more aware of each other in terms of tribes becoming more aware of each other, we can travel, that denial is no longer possible. We are hugely impacted by things that happen outside of our personal life, and therefore we need to be accountable in our personal life for how we contribute back into the system. And I think the work of the gene keys, and I'm going to call this part 2. Today, this lesson is part 2 of Unlock Your Potential, the simple way, really looking at the work of the gene keys, which I think is going to be one of the most powerful pathways that will help humanity to fulfill its highest potential. However, being a person who loves esoteric work, and I also love very pragmatic stuff, like I love my role as a mother because it's very pragmatic in the terms of my day-to-day. However, it takes me into a lot of psychological realms because you get very triggered when you're a parent, and being a mother in this time is a very undervalued role still, in that you don't receive any money for it, any admiration or recognition. So a lot of the things that we look towards in the modern life as empowering us isn't available for mothers, especially stay-at-home mothers or people who don't have roles where you naturally are going to draw in attention from others. So therefore you're probably not going to draw in wealth of others. So you're not influential in this way, and it can make you feel like you don't have the same power as another human being. And that is the biggest flaw of the system that we're moving out of, in that it really facilitates inequality, as in some people in particular jobs or particular life conditions can access all the resources, and other people who are just born into a different set of conditions, no matter how talented they are, will not access those resources and perhaps therefore not access the same level of wealth. Now, there may be a certain intelligence as to why this is occurring, and I believe there is, but I'm not going to tap into it in this lesson because I really want to focus on finishing off what I was speaking about in the first episode on Unlock Your Potential using the gene keys. Now, the issue with the gene keys for me is that it is quite complicated if you're not used to walking any type of spiritual path. You don't really have your head around spiritual concepts like, I believe, like the soul, higher potential. You just may think it's all a bit wishy-washy. But the intelligence of the gene keys is so important that I do think we need to find a way for people who are on the outside of this type of communities to be able to tap into the wisdom of this intelligence and apply it in their own life. Now, even if you are apprehensive about any type of esoteric work, I would still put your birth details into the Gene Keys profiling system and get your golden path map, just to have it available at some point. However, if we were going to put that to the side, what I was unpacking last week, and I suggest you watch that video, is that the Gene Keys has this model or this way of helping us understand what our life purpose is, about walking a particular pathway in which you move out of what I called enmeshment. That is where your energy is flowing into a system that isn't really serving your best self or your highest self, but it keeps you active out in the world in what's called an ego state. So you're out there in the world trying to succeed and survive and have relationships with all these people that is based on a version of you that you were born into, as in you got a name, you were born into a set of conditions, you were raised in a family system or cultural system that told you who you are, who you're not, who you're allowed to be, who you're not allowed to be. So you have this sense of self that is very fabricated in a way, and it allows you to interact with the people in your life, in the tribes in your life, to access resources in the culture that you are born into. It's a very useful, I guess, self to have. It's a tool. However, if all your energy is going into upholding an identity that is facilitated through that self, you can become very tired and fatigued because it's not really your true self. And everyone in their lifetime will come up against challenges that are really forcing them to question whether this fabricated self is really in their best interest. So you then find yourself maybe moving out of that enmeshment, starting to step into inquiries of who am I? What am I? What am I here for? And that has you start to challenge aspects of this conditioned self that aren't really serving you. And eventually you start to move into a more truthful, authentic version of self, which I might call the enlightened self. Your natural self is really shining out of you into your life. You're very illuminated. Now, that's not to say that you might not be sick or tired or have the normal, feel the normal impacts of living in a busy modern life as a human being with a limited energy system. But it means that your authenticity, your compassion, your open, friendly, warm heart, your tenacity, that can all shine through because you're no longer using your energy to maintain a sense of self that pleases others or protects you from others. You're free just to be yourself. So I call that ego state when it's very conditioned to please or protect the enmeshed self, and I call this state of self where you're very authentic and natural and, I guess, free-spirited, the awakened or illuminated self. Now, the thing is, we're just moving, aren't we, from one version of self to another, one that feels heavy and fixed and perhaps draining, and one that feels light, natural and energizing. And the movement between those selves I call the path of empowerment. It is finding that natural power back. And I believe that the Gene Keys, really the core of the work, is helping people to walk that path of empowerment. But what it says is you have your own personal pathway, and that personal pathway has its own flavor, its own patterning, its own storyline, and you are your own character. And it gives you lots of insight and information to understand the uniqueness of that pathway. But at the end of the day, what we're really looking at in the Gene Keys, when they look at a Gene Key, they call it a shadow state, a city state, and a gift. And what I realized through the work that I've been doing is if we really want to simplify this and we want to understand it in a way that we can just apply it practically, you would take any Gene Key and you would say, okay, the work here is the pathway, the gift. This is my life here on earth from birth to death. The pathway I'm walking is really being informed by whatever the gift part of my gene key is telling me. So for example, I have one which is, let's take one, I like the one transparency. So I have a gene key in my life's work which says that in the shadow state, I operate out of dishonesty or self-deception. I'm deceiving myself about who I am. And I spoke to that about that enmeshed state, that ego state. Now, it's not a calculated, wicked self-deception. It's a natural self-deception that happens when you're born and you operate in a conditioned state. You haven't had time to really consider, who am I? Because everybody's telling you who you are and you go along with it because it makes sense. It keeps you safe, or you just don't know any better. So that's that self-deception. In the city or the enlightened, when I'm really natural and flowing and open, it's called transparency. So I'm transparent, I'm authentic. There's no energy that's being used to maintain a fixed self because it's not necessary at that level. But the movement between the two is called intimacy, the pathway of intimacy. So in this lifetime, everything that is happening to me, all the relationships that I'm having, they're facilitating this pathway, this focus of into me see. They're asking me to look inside myself, become more intimate, more close with my self, with what I believe myself to be. And that's what my life work has been, and the work that I've done with people as a transformational life coach. So it makes sense. Now, when I listen to people debriefing the gene keys, sometimes I feel there's a bit of complexity and confusion. Some people want to focus on the shadow, the others want to focus on the city. You're trying to avoid one or get to one. And what I think is that we kind of miss the point. They're just anchor points. But the real work, if we're just focusing on what is a human life all about, what is the purpose of my human experience, it's always going to bring you back to the gift, the pathway. You could just look at that gene key profile and only look at the pathways, and you'll have all the information that you need about why your life is unfolding the way it is. Why are you having particular patterns of dynamics or relationship dynamics with the people close to you? Why do you have the same issues with people at work and at home? You look at those pathways and you'll get it. You'll see, okay, my life is the way it is on purpose. It is designed this way so that I can walk the path that I have chosen to walk, or that is mapped out in my gene keys. What are my guides? Well, I have these guides called the shadow or the enmeshed self, and this guide called the enlightened or the authentic self. And they're kind of giving me some information, I guess, about, am I veering more towards that enmeshed self on my pathway, or am I more aligned with the enlightened self? There's this game, hot cold, that I play with my kids. So you hide something and then you have to tell them if they're close to it, they're getting warmer, 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 hot. But if they're moving away from it, they're getting colder, 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 freezing. And I think that's exactly what this shadow city dynamic is showing us. It's like, okay, I'm moving away from my most empowered state in this particular situation, or I've been triggered, which is what happens in our relationships, right? We get triggered where suddenly everything's fine. We're having a moment with our partner or our kid, and then the next minute we're in this highly reactive state, and you're like, what the hell just happened? I love that. What the hell? You just went to hell, right? The triggered states are hell, and they create hell. You're freezing. You're right in that shadow state. But if you get it, you're like, oh, I've just got triggered. I'm highly reactive. I'm in the shadow state. My pathway in relationships. So that's the Venus sequence in the gene keys. You can come back and go, okay, I'm on this pathway of, what have I got one here? Expansion. So this is helping me. This is really feeding or supporting me in my pathway of expansion. So what might be something that I can lean in on here? Well, if I'm going to expand in my way of showing up in this relationship, maybe I need to step out of how I'm defaulted to react, which is reactivity, or to respond, which is reactivity, and I might bring in patience or something else. So you can see how this is really supportive. The Gene Keys Golden Path, it supports you to be in your human life, your daily ordinary life, and to see it for what it is, the food for your empowerment. Now, another thing that I just want to tap into before I finish this work on the gene keys, it's the second lesson. So I really suggest to go back and listen to the first one, because it really is a whole lesson on its own. And I actually really realized this bit about the city and the shadow and the pathway after I had done the first lesson, and I had more of a revelation around it, because I was putting it into practice in my own life. And what I've realized is that the shadow and the city are co-creative partners. One cannot exist without the other. And what I mean by this is that what you have in the shadow, the city is giving you the antidote for it. So, every reactive state, it has a kind of partner energy. So when I'm reactive, I get very anxious, for example. Maybe that's my thing. I become worried. I have an addiction to worry. So, I might worry or feel guilty or something that I have, been very reactive with my daughter. I can often feel guilty, even though she has a personality that is quite difficult to manage sometimes. So maybe feeling guilty is not always where I need to be. Maybe sometimes I have to put my foot down and she doesn't like it, and I feel bad about the conflict, but it's actually a healthy conflict which can happen. So I might need to draw in some compassion for myself in this situation. And being able to be compassionate means that I care about the conflict, but I'm not going to run away from the necessary set boundaries that I might have had to put into place in that dynamic. So in fact, the shadow state is inviting in a spiritual resourcefulness. Compassion is very much a spiritual tool. So in that reactivity, I'm actually generating higher states of compassion. And that higher state of compassion is going to raise my own vibration, the vibration of the relationship that my daughter and I have, but also generate more compassion in the whole system. So you can see how, in a way, when we go into these really strong shadow states, they are actually inviting in an equal amount of that enlightened resourcefulness, so that together those two are merging or forming a third entity, which is me, the empowered human being. So in a way, the shadow and the city have equal value in our path of personal empowerment. We cannot become empowered without both those players. So that's why they are actually a marriage, a union, equal partners that co-create this third entity. Now, the third entity work comes from ORSC, or Organizational Relationship and Systems Coaching. So it is a very technical term, but it really means that every relationship is creating a third relationship, one could say. So two people come together and they create a relationship, and a relationship is a third person, in a way, that is a combination of these two partners that have come together. So that third entity cannot exist without these two partners co-creating. So two people come together and create a child. I mean, nature shows us exactly how the third entity works. So in this Gene Keys model, he's always using threes on purpose. The two come together and create the third. So the city and the shadow come together and create the third entity, the gift, the pathway of empowerment. And you as the human being are a full expression of the gift, not the city and not the shadow, right? They are two energies that come together, two patternings that come together to create the unified whole, the human being. And there we have that unification of what is often seen as separate, good and bad, right? City is good, shadow is bad. City is heaven, shadow is evil. We really see how the gift brings that naturally into alignment, and we are operating out of a unified whole self. That is such a huge offering that the Gene Keys brings forward. And I do think, I love his work, and I've said that many times. I love listening to Richard Rudd. I listen to him whenever I'm lost, feeling down, or just for fun. And I love the Gene Keys, and I've spent a lot of time with it, among many other models that I think are useful. But if you want to take away the core wisdom of the Gene Key, it is that you are walking the path of personal empowerment. Personal empowerment is the highest potential of human beings at this point in history. It will be a full expression of our empowered heart. Now, if you want to do it practically, It means understanding that your personal empowerment has a particular flavor to it. You have gifts, a way of being in the world, and the Gene Keys will give you insight into what those gifts are. There are other ways to do it, but in this episode, I'm looking at the Gene Keys, that the shadow state and the siddhi are equal partners that are co-creating the third entity, which is you, the human being, living as a manifested, empowered form of the gift. So I, in a way, am a manifested, empowered version of intimacy. And I know that because I have a natural way of creating intimacy or being in relationships that have high levels of intimacy. And that has come from this marriage between transparency and dishonesty. It has come from this understanding that I have this deceptive self that can be very deceptive and a self that can be very authentic and natural. And it has brought me into an inquiry of, well, what is this self? If it can operate in all these different ways, then what is a self really? And I've come to understand that it is a creative tool that our energy can use to actually be a player out in the world. And I've done many videos on what is the self, so I'll let you explore those if you're interested in this particular insight. So walking away from today and finishing my work on how to simplify the path of personal empowerment but draw on the wisdom of the Gene Keys, I really will come back to looking at the model that Richard Rudd has introduced as a Gene Key being 3, a pathway, a gift pathway that moves from a shadow state to a siddhi state, but that it's not actually a movement from bad to good. It is in fact witnessing the merging of these two versions of self or patterns into a third entity, an empowered entity, and you'll know that by walking the gift pathway, tapping into what is the gift and really living that out in your day-to-day life. Now, one last thing before I finish this teaching on how to unlock your potential the simple way using the Gene Keys approach. Many people have no idea what the purpose of their life is, and they often wonder, or at least start seeking, because they're questioning why the conditions of their life are so different to the conditions of other people's lives, or they're seeking to understand why they're experiencing particular relationships or particular relationship dynamics, or why do some people have a family and other people remain single? Why do some people live with a lot of abundance and other people perpetually experience poor levels of abundance? I think these inquiries, these questions have been at the forefront of all human seeking for as long as we can remember. And there's lots of different modalities that are really seeking to find answers, and it can have us seeking for a very long time, and it can make seeking very complicated. And what I love about the Gene Keys approach is that it really cuts to the core of this. And if you really embrace the wisdom of this path of empowerment, the wisdom of your gift, you'll come to realize that the unique conditions of the daily, ordinary life that you're living today are the perfect conditions for you to fulfill your highest potential, to become a truly compassionate, empowered, heart-centered person. It is designed specifically with you as the character in mind. You've been born with a particular set of gifts, a particular personality, a particular quality of human nature, and a very particular way of loving and being loved. And I think the Gene Keys helps you come to understand this, so that anything that you're facing in your life right now, or anything that you've gone through, and you're still questioning, what is the value of that experience? Why am I having this difficulty? Why do I have more luck than other people? I mean, they're fabulous questions. But you start to see that your daily, ordinary life is food for your empowerment, and it is the perfect diet. I like to say it's the perfect storm, because the purpose of my work is really about helping people to feel genuinely empowered, satisfied, fulfilled, and enriched in their daily, ordinary, and at times very mundane life. And my own story of being, a very, educated, modern, well-traveled woman who has been conditioned to believe that I should do it all, have it all, and be it all. Being at home as a primary carer for my children for almost 15 years now, and also being, in a way, the primary carer for my from my own family of origin, I have been in a role that is very demanding. It has asked me to stretch myself in terms of learning to be less reactive and more responsive. I've had to call on every single psychological, spiritual, practical tool out there to support me to have compassion for myself while I'm doing this job. Because in the outer collective conditioned world, it's a very undervalued role. I don't have any obvious sources of reinforcement or reassurance that you do when you're out in the workforce, or you're an influential person who's been gifted with a particular wisdom that you can draw people in, and they'll pay for your services and they'll reinforce the value of what you're doing. As a mother, that doesn't happen. Your children rarely reinforce or reassure you that the work that you're doing is valuable to them. They may when they become adults, but most of the time you're doing a really hard job. You're probably doing more than you are equipped to do, and you get very little, if no, positive feedback on that. And that has certainly been my experience. Also, being married. Being married is a very challenging dynamic to be in. I mean, any type of intimate partnership, whether you're married or not. But for me, marriage has been something that I've had to work very, very hard at, coming from a traumatic family environment that I grew up in. So you can see how my daily, ordinary life, on the surface, it's unrecognized. It's not particularly valued by society. It has me doubting myself many times over. So it's been actually the perfect storm for me as a catalyst for me to go out and start investigating and exploring different modalities and teachings that can really support me to thrive in this role. And it's still a daily practice, let me tell you. I am definitely one of those parents who loses it and doubts myself and all of those things, but I can always step back into this space, when I do these free teachings, and feel grounded again and go, yes, I get it. I'm reminded of my karmic path and my dharmic path, which is what the Gene Key speaks to. But basically, I realize that whatever's happening in my life, I can tap back into my Gene Key profile. I can lift out a single gift or multiple gifts, the path of empowerment that I'm on, and go and think about this particular challenge. How is it serving me to fulfill my highest potential in this gift quality? So I absolutely encourage you, do put in your birth details at the Gene Keys. It's free. Get your golden path and play around with the insights that I have brought forward in these last two videos. Really look at that gift, your profile from the gift and the path of empowerment, and you will start to get some amazing insights into how your life makes perfect sense. And I think that will stop all this seeking, and we'll become much more relaxed in our day-to-day lives. So if you love this work, check out the Higher Life Academy. And until next time, take care and love life.